So really excited to be here with Nutri Advanced talking about pregnancy and motherhood today. I'm Dr. Stephanie, a GP and mum to 2 little girls, and I also co-host a podcast called the Medic Mum Podcast.
And I'm Serena Lee. I talk about a sustainable lifestyle and mindful parenting online, and I have 2 children who are 4 and 1.
Okay, so Serena, we've got a few questions to go through. First one, how do you prioritise taking care of your health as a mother, and what are some ways in which you implement this into your daily routine?
Do we take care of ourselves? I'd say the number one thing that I do is probably journaling. I say journaling, I mean ranting. I really just, after the baby has gone to bed in particular, I get out my journal and that's my self-care. I just write all of the frustrations of the day, and it always ends up being positive. It ends up flipping round and I go to bed happier.
I definitely don't have it nailed, but I think gradually over time I've realised that we need to take care of ourselves as well, and prioritise ourselves. And I think self-care, kind of looking after yourself, can look really different for loads of people. For me, I think trying to get some sleep in, it's so difficult with little ones, and it will depend on kind of what stage you're at. But I've noticed that the thing I do have control over is kind of when I go to bed.
What was your own experience of pregnancy, and how did you see your body, your mind and your health change?
Body definitely changes. Obviously you've got this kind of growing bump. That's probably the most visible thing, the thing that people think about when it comes to pregnancy. But then you've also got the other physiological changes that are happening. I've got my GP hat on here, and you've got changes in heart rate and blood pressure. You're also growing this placenta,
and the volume of blood goes up by 50%, doesn't
exactly.
it?
Like kind of your circulating volume increases, your dietary requirements, all of that kind of changes a little bit more towards the end of pregnancy as well. So there are loads of things that you experience physically. There are also the not so pleasant things, like I had really bad nausea with my second one. Lovely things like reflux, the pregnant women that I see, constipation, piles and hemorrhoids, all of the really delightful things that sometimes people don't talk about when they're pregnant as well. What sort of things did you experience?
One thing that springs to mind that still frustrates me is my feet grew a half size with my daughter, and then my second pregnancy, my son, another size. So I'm now full size and a half bigger in shoes. But the most frustrating thing is that in between the children, I thought, well, this is my new shoe size, and got my whole new set of shoes. I was like, no, I've just wasted all my money on these shoes that don't fit. But yeah, just about everything. Hair as well. My hair's still falling out. It's been 16 months. Like, it's, you get so much hair. I've now got a fringe, like my own fringe that's grown. And but it falls out so fast as well.
I used to refer to mine lovingly as like my tufts, because they would just stick out. Like no matter what I did, I tried all the hacks, with hairspray, hairbands and everything, but there would always be like this bit here that would just kind of stick out. And I'm like,
mine grew back in a different texture as well each time. The first one, it grew back super curly, and my daughter has very curly hair. I'm like, oh, is this related? And then my son, it grew back more wavy, and he has wavy hair. It's really strange.
Oh my goodness.
I don't know if there's anything behind it, but
oh my gosh, that's so sweet.
You had one of your children through IVF. Can you tell us a bit about how that was, what the experience, the process was like?
So actually before we had my eldest, we had a few rounds of treatment already. We had a round of IVF, which actually didn't work. By that time, I think we'd been trying for about 18 months. And then it didn't work, and we had what's called unexplained fertility. So we'd had all of the test investigations, everything seemed fine, which was good, but also frustrating, because we're like, okay, everything seems fine, but something's just not working, something's not clicking. And then actually the round of IVF itself went well. At every stage, kind of my body had responded in, the way that they had hoped it would, and so actually we were really feeling really positive about it. So for that not to work was pretty devastating. And so the month after, we thought, okay, we just need to take a break, reset, and try and figure out what to do next, because it's a lot to put your body through physically.
So all the injections and things.
So many
my friend
injections.
just told me about it recently. I didn't know. It's one of those things you don't realise unless you've been through it or know someone who has.
Exactly. There's a really intense period. I mean, there are obviously the test investigations leading up to it, and then there's a really intense period of about 2 weeks where you're having injections every day. It's a lot to go through, but we fell pregnant naturally with my eldest the month after. which was incredible. We just feel incredibly lucky to have her. And then time obviously went by and we were like, okay, we'd like to think about having a second, but very much aware that it might take us a little while or we might have to have some help again. So after 6 months of trying again and nothing happening, we thought, okay, well, let's go back to the clinic and see what can happen. We had some frozen embryos that had been made from the first cycle left over. So they said, well, we've got that. We can just basically prep your body, set you up, and then do the transfer.
That's amazing.
Honestly, that's
I didn't realise that was a thing. That's so cool.
You can do. And also, obviously, in my mind, I'm like, I know I'm medical, but in my mind, I'm like, there are these just frozen embryos in a fridge somewhere, sitting on a shelf, just literally frozen in time and ready to go. So we used those, and on transfer day you have to go in, and they will then, you just have to wait, and you will consent to kind of have the transfer, and that's when they do the thawing process. So we were sat in a cafe and we get this phone call and they kind of keep you updated, and they're like, okay, so we've got 5, we've thawed one. We've thawed one and one survived, and we've thawed the next one, but that didn't survive.
That's heartbreaking in itself.
The thing, so I didn't realise at the time, I felt incredibly upset, and obviously upset in a way that it hadn't survived. But what I didn't realise actually until afterwards, when you reflect on the situation, was it was a loss, and that's why it felt so kind of crushing. So anyway, they said, look, well, so you've got 3 left. What do you want to do? Do you want us to carry on? Because some people would say no, because we want to, maybe keep them for next time. What do you want to do? So I said, no, just carry on. So we get the phone call again, and they're like, okay, we've thawed 2 more, but none of them have survived either. So like, okay. And they're like, we've got 1 more. What do you want to do? So we'll just thaw that one and see. And then get the phone call, and that one hasn't survived either. So we've got this 1 embryo left for transfer. And the first time round when we had the IVF, we had 2 transferred, and that didn't work out. So my husband and I are already kind of thinking a few steps ahead, thinking, it's not going to work out. Trying to, plan, and just thinking, okay, well, we'll just, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So they did the transfer. I then actually went off and I did some filming for another brand later that day. The whole crew and everyone, they knew, but I just thought, what else am I going to do? I can't just sit around and think about it. I'd actually rather just be doing something completely different, distracting myself. And then it comes to the pregnancy test 2 weeks later. So what they want you, some people will pregnancy test at home with a urine test, or you'll be invited to go in for a blood test. So I went in for a blood test, and then they call you with the result.
Oh my gosh.
I froze. I couldn't, they started asking my name just to confirm my name, date of birth. I was with my husband. I couldn't speak, I couldn't carry on. So I just gave him the phone. I was like, you have to talk to her, I can't do this. But she said it was positive. And so that was the most incredible feeling as well. Sorry. Honestly, it's just, I think it's just a lot to go through.
And it's the early pregnancy as well, isn't it? That it's then like, oh my gosh, I need to be so careful, or I'm so worried that something, until that first scan, and then even after that, like, oh. Yeah,
but they were so brilliant. I was very spoiled. I had a scan like every week up until 10 weeks. And then that's when they kind of discharge and they're like, you can go, you're fine. And you can go on to just kind of the regular pregnancy pathway. And then you're used to all that extra care, and it's like, exactly. Like, why am I not having a scan every week? What's going on? So it's, it's a lot to go through. And even though we've been through all of that, we still feel incredibly lucky because we actually have our 2 girls. And I know, and I met so many people at the clinic who were there for their, 8th, 9th round of IVF. Some people who I know have had rounds of IVF and have made the decision to stop. And I think just infertility in general is just not spoken about. Like you said, maybe you found out through friends, and I think it's so great that they have shared in that way, but it's difficult to share something which is so intimate and so personal.
It's not on the person to share, is it? No. It's like if they feel that they're able to, that they want to, amazing, but it's not on them to do that.
And the likelihood is that we all know someone who is actually going through treatment, even though you might not know about it. It's 1 in 7 couples experience infertility. And so, you know, we will all be touched by it somehow at some point. And so I think we need to be mindful about how we speak to people about starting a family, having a baby. You know, as soon as you get married, for it, you know, it's like the green light for people to start asking. You probably experienced it yourself. You know, when's the baby coming and all of this. And
my mum still does it now, like to people at work and things. She'll come home and she'll say, oh yeah, I was asking them, you know, they got married. So I was saying, well, I'm like, Mum, you can't ask people that. You don't know what they're going through, you know?
Yeah. And also if you're going through it yourself, I think, you know, finding someone at least that you can confide in. Mm-hmm. There are some incredible people that share very openly on social media. I've shared, but retrospectively, which I think is a bit easier in a way, because I can say, well, we've got this end result, but this is what it was like. But some people who are really kind of documenting it as they go, which I think is incredible. And so, you know, finding that online community, if, you know, you don't have to share either, but finding someone who kind of has that common ground with you.
Yeah, someone that you can relate to, or someone that you can rely on, or
Yeah.
Are there any really common misconceptions that you've had as a doctor that just make you want to pull your hair out? Like, obviously it's not true, or maybe something that people say that actually is true?
Yeah, so I think that there are lots. There are loads that you will kind of see online. I think, let's start at the beginning. I think when you're even trying to conceive, you know, people think that different sexual positions, for example, are going to guarantee that you're going to have a girl or a boy. Like, obviously that is just not true at all. And then also gender related is that people can tell if you're having a boy or girl from like your bump. I'm sure you probably had people coming up and like guessing.
I've had people very sure, and I knew the gender, and I'm like, well, it's 50-50 that you know.
Yeah, exactly. Eating for 2 is another one. So actually the guidance is that, you know, if you're pregnant, you know, if your appetite increases whilst you're pregnant, that is absolutely fine, and you can eat whatever you want, but you don't have to eat for 2. Actually, the calorie intake, that requirement only increases when you get into the 3rd trimester, and even then you only need an additional 200 calories a day. Do you have any funny pregnancy stories, or did you have any unusual cravings or behaviour?
Oh, one time, it was just one time, I cried when I didn't get the snack that I wanted. It was like 3rd trimester. I had been feeling nauseous. No one tells you about the nausea in the 3rd trimester. You think it's over with, and then like week 32 or whatever, it can come back. So I'd been having horrible nausea, and all the way through, salt and vinegar, balsamic vinegar, kettle chips.
Very specific.
Were like the one, because it's got that saltiness, but also the acidity that cuts through the nausea. That's what I felt I needed.
Yeah.
So I'd have those, family bag, all like every day, or maybe not every day, over 2 days at a push. And I was waiting with the dog outside Tesco, and I'd sent my husband in to get some bits, but obviously don't forget the kettle chips. And he came out and he said, oh, I'm sorry, they didn't have the kettle chips today. And I said, oh, so what did you get me? And he said, oh, nothing. And it was quite busy, it was a long queue. I just burst into tears. It was so ridiculous. I needed it, so I felt so sick, and it was like a long day, and I was ready for my nausea to just cut out. And when he said he returned empty-handed, I just couldn't take it. I just started crying. It's ridiculous to look back, but actually kind of funny as well.
Was your eldest with you at the time at all?
This was my first pregnancy.
Oh, your first pregnancy, okay. I was going to say, otherwise you'd be like, see? You know how I feel now. You know, when they just don't have that.
But yeah, I think that's the only time that really sticks out. How about you? Is there anything?
Yeah, so we flew back to Malaysia. I was in kind of 3rd trimester, and obviously it's an incredibly long flight, and I'd taken my shoes off, and my feet just swelled up like nothing I've seen before. You know, normally you get a little bit, and it's a little bit difficult to put your shoes back on, but you managed to do it anyway. But I couldn't get my shoes back on. I walked off the plane and had to go through the airport with no shoes on, because I just didn't have anything. Because they were just too swollen. Cravings wise, I enjoyed anything that was like wrapped in pastry. So anything kind of cheesy or like meat based. So sausage rolls, pork pies. Basically, if you walked into Greg's, you know, that bakery section, I would happily eat any of the things from there, like every day. Typically, people find that they go off like more fresher food and meat because it's a protective thing to try and reduce the risk of like food poisoning, being unwell. So it's just all the beige carb foods, basically. That's what I wanted.
What advice would you share with other women that have experienced changes in their bodies postpartum?
Firstly, I would say that it's completely normal to experience changes. Your body goes through huge changes during pregnancy as well, and then after giving birth. I mean, everything is just, it's almost like your body is unrecognizable. I still remember, you know, a few hours after giving birth, I remember looking down at my stomach and thinking, what is going on there? It's like squidge that you've never seen before.
Yeah, it's just empty, like an empty pocket.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, there are the immediate changes that you will notice, but also you're going to have bleeding postpartum. We spoke about the hair loss afterwards as well. That's usually something that we all notice about 3 to 6 months afterwards. You may notice a bit of leaking, so urinary incontinence. That's purely because your pelvic floor has been put under so much strain during pregnancy. It's not, again, another misconception is that you only have pelvic floor problems if you've had a vaginal delivery, but actually it applies to people who've had a cesarean section because you've carried your baby the whole of pregnancy. So there's a huge kind of weight there. And so that's actually what is going to weaken the pelvic floor rather than actually how you've given birth. Obviously that can contribute, but actually, you know, people who've had a C-section still need to be aware of their pelvic floor. You've got constipation as well. Like we mentioned earlier, piles and hemorrhoids, sometimes they can get worse after pregnancy, giving birth.
Everyone talks about that. Everyone talks about that when you're there. No one talks about it before.
Exactly. It's like,
oh my gosh, everything has just been like opened up, potentially sewn back up, and then you then have to do a poo. Like,
it's the most it's the scariest thing. It's the most intimidating thing.
And that's when I was like, oh my gosh, plant-based diet. I'm so grateful because it's so high fiber.
And one of my top tips for any pregnant people or like relatives or friends is take some laxatives in with you at the hospital and basically just start taking them immediately after you've had the baby, because sometimes they can take a while to kind of get into your system as well, and like plenty of fluids. So yeah, those are all the delightful things that you will notice afterwards. And I think the key thing is that it's very normal for that to happen. These symptoms are not something that are persistent, so they should gradually get better.
Yeah, for example, the bleeding shouldn't be as heavy as it is on day 5 in 6 weeks or something.
Exactly,
like that, right?
Exactly. We want to basically see an improvement in everything. So if you're still leaking urine like 12 months down the line, that is not normal. Whilst it might be common and other friends may be experiencing it, it's not normal. There's lots that you can do. You can see a women's health physio, for example. Again, a lot of people don't know that they exist, that can help you with your pelvic floor and kind of assess what's going on. There are lots of things that can be done. So again, I think there's a narrative that you've had a baby, so you know these things are just going to happen. You've just got to put up with it, but that is not.
It's good to keep an eye on what's normal and what's expected and what's healthy and what's maybe not so healthy.
Yeah, exactly. What about you? What would you say to kind of postpartum people who've noticed changes?
I mean, it would be abnormal to not notice changes, right? Like that's just how it is. You've just grown a big old watermelon baby and pushed it out or had it taken out of your stomach, or out of your belly. So, you know, for me, it was about just relaxing into the postpartum phase and focusing on the baby rather than on my body. I didn't even realise, like with the weight and all of that, I didn't realise how long it took to lose until I had lost it all, like a year later. I looked back and thought, oh my gosh, I really looked like that 4 months postpartum. Didn't notice it at the time at all. I think during pregnancy or even more so before pregnancy whatsoever, it's scary to look down the line and be like, whoa, I've changed so much. But when you're in it, if you just throw yourself into your role, for me, it wasn't even noticeable until afterwards.
Yeah, and I think also sharing then, your experiences or what you've noticed helps so much because you know that other people are in the same position as you, noticing the same things as well, which I think can be really valuable because sometimes you think, oh gosh, maybe it's just me.
Yeah, and just normalising postpartum bodies and what they look like as well.
And stretch marks and everything as well. Yeah.